Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. A warm welcome back to Torah. Tonight's class, I'm going to tell you, it's, what do you say? It's off the charts. It's going to be off the charts. We're dealing with Parashat Chukat. Chani, you have to mute yourself. Thank you. We're in chapter 20. We're going to be starting with the second verse in Numbers. And we're dealing with the death of Miriam. Now, interestingly enough, I know this phrase is very familiar to those of who had a Christian background. A concept called the Vicarious Atonement. Now, there's a huge misunderstanding because anything that the Christians took on, I shouldn't say anything, most of the things they took on, has its roots in Judaism, but unfortunately, for whoever's sake, for the world's sake, they perverted and they, corrupted these concepts. So there is such a concept, but we need to define terms because the word vicarious implies a substitute in terms of atonement. So it's not exactly a substitute, but let's assume for a moment that there is some kind of a substitute. But also, it has nothing to do with personal salvation. In other words, in Judaism, the concept of, as we will see, that Miriam's death or the death of righteous people can and sometimes will atone. For whom? For the nation, for the people, but not as individuals per se. Everyone must do tshuva. You still have to do your own personal work. But there will be a mitigation. There will be a lessening of the punishment. There will be a lessening of the severity of the punishment. There will be a lessening of a prosecution on the Jewish people as a result of what we will refer to, for practical purposes, as vicarious atonement. But let's not use that term because that's not a Hebrew term. We will discuss it in Hebrew and you'll become more familiar with the Jewish concepts and where perhaps the church went wrong. Okay, that's just also. Now, another idea within Judaism regarding this idea is there's no obligation to believe it. It is irrelevant whether you believe that person was righteous and died and there was a mitigation of your sins or not. It's totally irrelevant. If it's a fact that it's true, it's true. No matter, either way, it's true. And even the word, as we will discuss, is a kapara. Kapara means atonement, or that's how it's translated anyway. It really means a covering. There's a covering over. As if when God comes to judge, there is, like I said, it's less. There's a mitigation circumstance here. There's less judgment. Okay? And in fact, the covering of the ark, the holy golden ark, is called a kapores. That's the root. The word means to cover over. Now, it also has another interesting translation, interpretation of the word. It also means an oxymoron, which, believe it or not, that's what Parashat Chukat is really all about, right? How someone who is in a state of purity, who goes and sprinkles this paraduma water on someone who's in a state of impurity, he himself becomes impure, and the person who was impure becomes pure. So keep that in mind, that also the word kaparot, the concept here we're talking about, is also translated or interpreted and understanding as an oxymoron. Keep in mind that the very cover of the Holy Ark is that very place that the divine voice speaks to us from, right? Where there's not just divine speech, we're talking about divine inspiration is coming through this kaporet. So keep this in mind. This is going to, I think, change our whole view of what this concept is. Now, let me just tell you what the concept is, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the Yakar. And I just want to mention, we hope that the people watching this learn Hebrew. And there are source sheets on the Yiboneh website, and below in the description box is a link. You just have to find which book, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, whatever, and which Parsha, and then of course which year, because we don't know which year you're watching this. Right now, I'll just give you a clue. This is the year 5,781 from creation. You figured that one out. The concept is ma hakarbanot mikaprim, just as korbanos, as the offerings that we offer in the temple, atone, again, whatever atonement means in terms of covering over, in terms of forgiveness, so too, af mitat hatzadikim mikaperet. So too, the death of the righteous also served the same purpose. Okay, so one of the things we've already discovered just by me saying it is this is a Jewish concept, and it applies to many tzaddikim, not just one. Okay, and not only that, that's another very important point is the tzaddik we're talking about is not a completely righteous tzaddik. He or she has to have been human being with an aspect of sin, meaning they could not have been perfect without sin, because then they could never atone and experience any pain or suffering. Okay, so we're going to get into that's why the Christian concept is just way off for everything I already mentioned. But let's get into the nitty gritty. So we're going to start with verse 2 in chapter 20, where it says like this: the congregation had no water. Now this is 39 years later. What do you mean no water? We had water coming out of a rock for 39 years. But all you have to do is look at the previous, right? The first verse is, we had arrived there, and Miriam died there and was buried there. That's verse 1. And verse 2, there was no water. The Yakar is telling us that as a result of her death, there was no water. Meaning because she died, there was no water. Does that make any sense? The truth is, for 39 years, we had water because of her. And once she died, there was no water. Why? What's going on? So right away, he tells us, outside ha'onish chasru hamayim. From a certain aspect of punishment, there was a lack of water. Now in Judaism, when we talk about punishment from God, our God is not a punishing God. Meaning, it doesn't mean there's not, we have a problem with the English translation. I don't like the word punishment, but we'll use it anyway. The punishment, so I'm putting in quotes, that we receive from Hashem are actually love taps. He is warning us. He is telling us in a strange way, you're doing something wrong, and I'm going to let you know you're doing it wrong. And I'm giving you a clear message, measure for measure, something that he's doing to us should awaken us. We should have the insight, and if we don't have, we should pray for it. We should learn Torah. We should learn what it is that we're doing wrong by examining our deeds and examining the so-called punishment so that we could figure out exactly what it is we're doing wrong so we could correct our behavior. So now whenever we use the word punishment, that's what we mean, okay? So apparently there was a lack of water as a result of a punishment. And what does the Yakar explain to us was the reason why? Lefi shelo hispiduha karoi, because we did not give her a proper eulogy. We did not mourn for her. How do we know we didn't mourn for her? Because the Torah doesn't tell us. It's like it's a secret. Listen, when it came to Moses and Aaron, Kiba Moshe v'Aaron Ne'emar, it does say it. It says it quite clearly. Now I'm just going to refer to two verses, and you can look them up on your own. In Numbers chapter 20, verse 29, which means our chapter just a few verses later, it says, the whole congregation saw that Aaron had died, and the entire house of Israel wept for Aaron for 30 days. And then go to Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 8. That's towards the end of the Chumash. And the sons of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days, and the days of weeping over the mourning for Moses came to an end. The word v'yivchu b'nei Yisrael, actually, let's go to the Hebrew. It says in 20, verse 29, v'yiru kol ha'eda, the whole congregation saw, Aaron, that Aaron passed on, the Yivchu, and they cried. And then go to Deuteronomy 34:8, and the very first word is the Yivchu b'nei Israel, that the children of Israel cried, okay, for the death of Moses. So those words do not appear anywhere here. In other words, the Yivchu, There was no crying. There was no feeling of the loss of Miriam. In fact, what does it say? Go back one verse to chapter 20, right? We're in chapter 20, verse 1. It says, V'tamat sham v'tikaber sham. She died there and she was buried there. Doesn't mention one place, mention one iota. It doesn't even hint to the fact of the Jewish people mourning her loss. In fact, ki b'makam shemeta, in the very place that she died, sham tehei kavurata la'altar. She was buried there immediately. V'nishchacha kamet milev. She was forgotten from the heart, as we know. That's how, after a year anyway, we do forget. Not entirely, but there's the mourning period is over. It's finished after a year, right? And that's why we have to learn Torah every year. We can't go years without learning Torah. Every day we have to learn Torah, and hopefully it will have a cycle. And because we forget after a year, that's how Shem made us. We forget after a year. Now there's some good things about that and bad things about that. There has to be closure, right? When someone passes on, we have to move on with our lives. But what did they do? Lo hirgishu behadeira klal. They didn't feel or perceive her lack or the loss of Miriam at all. And that would be a problem, because for 39 years they received water in her merit. In her merit. Al-Kay Nixru Lehem Amayim. This is the very reason the water was withheld from them. They lacked water. Kedei. Remember, Mida Keneged Mida. Hashem wants us to know what it is we're doing wrong. Jewish people, listen to me. We have to live with an attitude of gratitude. We have to thank people. We have to recognize. Thank you very much. So that we would know retroactively that the water came because of her. As soon as she died, the water stopped coming. What, we didn't know that for 39 years? Perhaps, right? Where were we told that? Nowhere. But now we know. And now we have to recognize that. Now, this is the middle of a paragraph, but there's a period. And I believe the next few lines, he's introducing the main concept. It's a little bit, continuation, and perhaps a little bit of switching gears. He brings down a Gemara in Moed Katan at 28a, and we will take a look at it. I just don't know if we'll look at it totally right now. I think at the end, I want to go deeper into the sources. I want to be able to cover some ground to give you the overall view, and then we'll go deeper into the sources. So in Moed Katan, it says like this. Shenismecha misasa leparshas para, that there is this juxtaposition between the death of Miriam and just a few verses earlier, the chapter before, is dealing with the whole chapter is dealing with the paraduma. The paraduma being the red heifer, and whatever it does to accomplish whatever it needs to, which is to cleanse and to purify the people so that they can go up to the Temple Mount and bring korbanos and basically it acts as a spiritual disinfectant. I like that word, and we'll see why. A spiritual disinfectant against this ritual impurity, okay? Against this spiritual impurity. And therefore what happens, this is the statement. This is all in order to teach you, as I said earlier in the 10 minutes ago, ma karbanos mikaprim, just as the offerings, sacrifices. I don't like the word sacrifices. A korban, the root is to come close. These offerings allow us to come close. Why don't you bring your bike in? Oh, you locked it up? Af misas tzadikim mikaperis. So too, the death of the righteous caused the same thing. They also cause an atonement or a covering over or a mitigating of punishment, however we're going to look at it. But we have a few questions. Is the paraduma a korban? And is it the only korban? Why here? Why does the death of Miriam appear here next to the paraduma? We know we already received the paraduma in the first year, let's say towards the end of the first year, at least by the first Pesach in the desert, at least by then. That was the whole Mishkan was put up, erected, right? You had we had Pesach Sheni, but it was told because people were impure, and right, so there was a purity process going already then. So what do you mean 39 years later? It must be there's a reason for it. Remember, there's other korbanos, all of Vayikra. So you're talking about all that was in preparation as well for the first of Nisan of the first year, because that's when korbanos were starting to be brought. So why 39 years later put in this juxtaposition of the death of Miriam next to the paraduma? So the first question the Yakar asked is, Lama nismecha dafka lapara? Why is it over there by the para? First of all, ki be'emet eina korban. It's not even a korban, right? It's done outside of the mikdash. Now, I should have made a better picture, but maybe you can't see it. But basically, what happens is the korban, all the korbanos, are done within the temple compound. Okay, there's very specific places and where it can be done inside the temple area itself. Here, I'm not going to call it a korban anymore, but the paraduma is slaughtered outside on the Mount of Olives, so to speak, on the mountain opposite. But the Kohen who does the slaughtering, I'm not even sure if a Kohen only. There's other opinions, but the one slaughtering this paraduma has to have a visual straight through the gates of surrounding the Temple Mount and inside into the Holy of Holies when he slaughters this korban. Maybe that, I shouldn't call it a korban. It's not really a korban, but so it's the paraduma. It's outside the temple compound, which we know korbanos are not supposed to be done outside the korban, right? Outside the temple compound. Yet there is this, I don't know what you call it. It's like an illusion that he's there because he has to be as if he can see the whole thing. Okay, let's go back into the Yakar. And he asked another question. Well, I shouldn't say a question. He makes a point. Now this point, I think, strengthens the question because we already said it's not a korban. And why specifically this of all animals called a paraduma? So he says, Rak mashim etzinu shekara katuv chatas. It must be based on this idea. Think about this second. We find by the paraduma the word chatas. Now, the word chatas usually means, in almost all cases, it means a sin offering, a actual korban chatas, a sin offering. Keep in mind, the word chatas does not always have to mean that. In fact, if you go to chapter 19 of Numbers, verse 9, you will see clearly that the word chatas does not even come close to the general term we've been using it, that being a sin offering. Look at, it says, a ritually clean person shall gather the cow's ashes, place them outside the camp in a clean place, and it shall be as a keepsake for the congregation of the children of Israel for sprinkling water used for cleansing. The word chatas means for purification, for cleansing, and that's why I called it a spiritual disinfectant. In fact, in this past year, there's one word I learned. I learned many words, but there was, when you purify your hands with that alcohol gel, it's called chitui yadayim, purifying your hands. So look at Rashi. What does it mean for purification or cleansing? The word chatas, right? Usually it's used for a sin offering. Here, it's an expression of cleansing, according to its simple meaning. But according to halachot, Scripture calls it a chatas. Scripture is referring to it as a sin offering, but it's not. Just keep that in mind, okay? It's not really the typical korban as we already explained, but rather it's more like a disinfectant, okay? Just like the alcohol gel. Now, let's go on. Now that we know that, he says, aval ha'ikaru. This is going to be the whole point. Now, we have to keep this in mind. It's an allusion. He describes it in a poetic way. And we will spend a lot of time discussing what it means. He says these words. Keshem shapara ba'a lokaneach tzoa bona. Remember, this is based on midrashim and whatnot, this language. Just as the mother cow, right? A para aduma. Para has to be at least in its second year of life, capable of having children, and she's a para, she's a cow. The egel hazahav, the golden calf, that she's coming to atone for the Jewish people's sin of the golden calf. Not individuals, the nation. So just as the mother cow comes to clean up the feces, the dirt, the mess that her child made, so too tzedeket, this particular woman, Miriam, but in general, a righteous woman, what does she do? Keep this in mind. This is very pro-feminist, this class. This is very pro-woman. That what is she doing? A righteous woman? Aim kol chai. The oral Torah is calling her, every righteous woman, a mother of all living things, a mother of life itself. B'misasa, that through her death, mikanacha tzoa todoteha, that she ends up cleaning. She's causing a cleanliness, a cleaning process of the dirt of her progeny. So even if you're not literally from that, from her womb, you're not a biological child of this righteous woman's life and therefore her death is serving also as a process of purification for, again, is it for you or is it for everybody? It's not personal. There's no personal salvation here. This is for everybody. Okay? Now, V'smichut zu meviim hamidrashim ba'arba makomos. Happens to be 4 famous midrashim that express this idea. These 4 midrashim are found in 4 different places. And if you have the English sheets, number 8, I'll tell you what they are in Hebrew. Smichat misas b'nei Aaron liyom kippurim hamikaper. Right? If you go to the chapter in Leviticus, chapter 16, you will notice, right, this is an Achrei Mos, after the death of the 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, of Aaron. So what do we see? All the laws of Yom Kippur. First of all, just like, when did they die? They didn't die anywhere near Yom Kippur. They died on the 1st of Nisan as well, in the first year. So you're talking about approximately half a year later, give or take, right? A little bit more. 6.5 months, whatever it is. 6 months and 10 days. Whatever it is, why is their death, and then you have juxtaposed the laws of Yom Kippur? Okay, there's a lot of reasons why, but the reason the Medrash is bringing in is because there is a reason for, these were righteous men sanctifying Hashem's name, very holy men who died, and right away you have a concept of Kippur, of the word we've been discussing the whole night, of atonement or a mitigating against harsh punishment. I think that's a better way to describe it. The second midrash is the one we were discussing, Smicha to Miriam Tapara, that we find in Moed Katan. And then the third one is the Smichas Misas Aaron Lebigdei Kahuna Hamikaprim. Now we could look at this. This is also in the same page as Miriam's death in Moed Katan 28a, that describes the Kohen Gadol's garments, which are 8. Each one atones for a different sin. Now, again, it's not personal. These are general sins for the people. Now, I want to go through these sources, but I want to go through them only after we finish this short paragraph in the Yakar. I want to go deeper into the sources. But anyway, also in Parshas Ekev, which I think we'll just spend a little bit more time on. So if you notice, okay, one second, not yet. He basically explains, what does it say over there in oh, this is the 4th one. In Parshas Ekev, it says like this. there's a midrash, Samach misas Aaron l'shviros haluchos, that the death of Aaron is mentioned very close proximity to the breaking of the luchos. So if you go, just take a look. We're talking about chapter 10 of Deuteronomy, verse 6. That talks about Aaron's death. But up until that point, I think it's 2 or 3 verses before, it mentions the very fact that God's now giving them the second tablets, but he has to mention because the first ones were broken and shattered. So what does it teach us by the proximity of speaking about Aaron's death to the Shviras HaLuchos? Shekasha mitat tzadikim, that is difficult, troublesome, harsh, is the death of the righteous, just like the breaking of the luchos. Luchos are the tablets. Now, the next part of this paragraph is going to sum up 4 benefits that we benefit from the, I'll say, the life and death of the righteous. Now, 3 of them are really about their life, and the 4th one is about their death. So let's go through them. That would be still number 9 on page 3. So it says like this. What is, okay, Lefi shemin kol tzaddik, that extending, or right, drawing forth from every tzaddik, extending from every tzaddik, every righteous person, Yegia livnei doro, will extend to that generation, the people of the living on the planet at that time. That means all of us, whether you believe it or not, whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. Arba mini tolaot. There's going to be 4 benefits. The very fact that these tzaddikim are alive and pass on eventually, there are going to be these 4 benefits, whether you believe it or not. Echadhu, shekol ha'olam nizum b'schuto. This is a very interesting concept, that the entire world will not experience famine and like horrible problems on their beret. In other words, they, by them being alive, they will nourish people physically, meaning with food. The food that we receive is because of their righteous deeds. Okay? It says in Chazal, in Gemara Brachos, which I'd also like to look at in detail, that the Kol Ha'olam Nizom B'Shvil Chanina B'ni, that Chanina's father said the entire world is receiving food on my son's account. Now we will see it. That's true. Guess how much he ate? Chanina ate 1 bucket of carobs the entire week, from Shabbos to Shabbos. Meanwhile, the whole world had food. This is a very interesting concept. He himself suffered. He himself was a big tzaddik, and yet the whole world nourished because of him, and yet he somehow suffered. We'll talk about that. I want to go deep into it. Continue, just like we explained in Parshas V'yechi. If you go into Genesis chapter 50, verse 11, when the Jewish people, when Israel took Yaakov up to Mars HaMachpelah to bury him there was a stop on the way. They were mourning. The Canaanites saw us mourning. But where was the place? The place was called Goren Hatad. That was a threshing floor. Remember, Yaakov himself came down to Egypt. There was supposed to be 7 years of plenty, which there was. And then there was supposed to be 7 years of famine, which there wasn't. He came down in the 2nd year, and because of his presence, what happened to Yaakov? There was a cease. That famine stopped on account of the tzaddik. The tzaddik came and brought with him plenty of bracha, and what happened as a result? There was lots of food. So where did they stop on the way? As a sense of gratitude to the threshing floor, where there is either storage house of food, or that's where it's processed. Also, in Parshas Emor, we discussed this idea about the 7 closest relatives, right? There were 7 closest relatives that a Kohen, not a Kohen Gadol, but a regular Kohen, should metam himself for, meaning go to their funeral, participate, right? go to the cemetery and whatnot. Now, it mentions 6 of the closest relatives by name. The 7th one, the first one, isn't mentioned except through a hint, because it says ki'im l'she'ero, except for his closest relative. Now, we would translate that as except for his flesh, right? Relative and flesh means skin, is except for his skin or his kin, is right. And who's that? Who's his closest relative? His wife, right? In the list, there's no wife, but we all know there's 7. That's our tradition, and our tradition is that those words, his closest relative, meaning his flesh, means his wife. But how does she become his flesh? How is that? Without getting sexual here. We're just talking about the very fact that she is going to hunt, right? He's going to sit and learn, and she's going to go hunt. No, I'm kidding. I'm being a little bit joking here. That she will stand in the kitchen and cook, and she sweats, and all her love and energy is going into that food that she's preparing for him, and therefore, when she feeds it to him, what does that food become? His flesh. So she's putting her flesh, so to speak, into the food that is now becoming his flesh. That is the intimacy, right, through the stomach of husband and wife. So therefore, we understand that, remember we said earlier, the mother is cleaning up for her child. She's doing more than that. She's manika. She is nourishing her children through the actual blood becomes milk, right? And the breast is where it's coming into. And the child himself, or herself, then it's becoming their flesh as well. So he says, Hare hema kamo ha'em, that this righteous people, they are acting in the way, and we're talking about women specifically, they're acting in a way like a mother who nourishes, or let's say nurses, her children. And that's why in Song of Songs, or some people know the Song of Solomon, in chapter 4, verse 5, now there's 2 ways to interpret every verse in Song of Songs. That would be allegorically and literally. When I say allegorically, I'm referring to using the oral Torah to understand what was being said, and literally to what it actually says. Now I just have to find it on my page. Anybody see it? Song of Songs. It's number 15 on page 6. It literally says, your 2 breasts are like 2 fawns. Look in the Hebrew. Shnei shadaich. Your 2 breasts are like these types of fawns, like baby Bambis, the twins of a gazelle who graze among the roses. Right? Now, that's the literal translation. But the allegoric translation, because of our oral Torah, says like this, that those 2 breasts are sustainers. Who are they? That's referring to Moses and Aaron, who are righteous people sustaining the generation in the desert, are like 2 fawns, twin of the gazelle who graze their sheep in rose-like bounty. Okay, let's go back into the Yakar, because basically he's referring to these 2 breasts as Moshe and Aaron. That's how Rashi explains it over there. We also find in Gemara Tainus that it was because of Miriam that they actually had the water coming out of the rock. It's called Be'er Miriam. And why was that? If we remember back when Pharaoh said, or implied, or actually did, he wanted to have the Jewish babies, the male babies, killed. He was afraid, because of his astrologers, that the Mashiach, the Messiah, would be born. And he had the male babies thrown into the Nile and killed. And there were 2 midwives, Yocheved and Miriam, by the way, who not only saved the babies from being killed, but provided for all their needs. They provided for their needs. They gave them shelter. They gave them food. They caused them to live. That's what the verse implies. They caused them to live, meaning they supplied all their needs. So too, this is what the Be'er Miriam did. Mida keneged Mida does not only work in the negative, it also works in the positive. That in the merit of knowing what Miriam did, that she supplied the needs of these children, these helpless children, so too that she in her merit, that this Be'er Miriam supplied for the Jewish people all their needs. And now we understand why there is a proximity, right, a placement of the death of Miriam to the Para Aduma. Zesmichat misasa lapara. Now we really understand, we're talking about the death of a righteous woman such as Miriam being placed in the Torah next to the Paraduma, which it didn't need to be. We already discussed that in the beginning. The Paraduma is not even like a korban. And not only that, there were other korbanos earlier on in Vayikra and whatnot, and even in terms of the timing. So here it comes. Aim ha'egel. Who is the para? The para, the cow, is the mother of the calf. The calf is the thing that ruined things, right? It came and fixed up, cleaned up the mess that the child made. So keep in mind that it's talking about, and that's what many of the Midrashim explain, many of the Meforshim explain, that the Para Aduma cleans, takes care of, purifies the sin. Again, it doesn't totally expiate it, and we still have to do tshuva, right? And we're still suffering till this day. We know, our tradition tells us, that there may have been expunged to a certain extent, right? A lessening of punishment because of the sin of the golden calf. But we still have tshuva to do, okay? And that's the first thing that righteous people do. They lessen, here in this case, they provide for the needs. That's what we mean. They provide for the needs while they're alive and even after they die. Hatzadik melamdam lahoil derech Hashem mitzvos. What else what other benefits does a righteous person provide? They teach, they supply lessons about the benefit of following the way of God and keeping His mitzvahs. Al kain doima petirato kashvir saluchos. That's why the death of those righteous people, right, when they pass on, petirato, it's like the breaking of the luchos. The luchos represent the Torah, as if the Torah itself has been shattered when they pass on. The third merit, the third benefit that the people benefit from while they're alive, sheschuto magen, that in their merit we are protected. We are protected, katzel, just like shade or shadow or a refuge, protection. Ukabeged hasui lahatzil mikor v'chom. Just as a blanket, just as a garment, just as some type of whatever a beged. Beged generally means a garment, but just as the garment is made for protection from extreme cold and extreme heat, it protects oneself. Ubemoto, and in their passing on through their death, sar silam. The word silam also means their image of God, right? Has been removed, their protection. The same word, image of God and protection, right? It's a very nice poetic way of saying it, but through their death, the protection had been removed. Hareihem arumi mikol michseh. And that, as a result, the people would be naked from any type of covering. Okay? So we're going to see in the Gemara itself those two aspects of the death of Miriam and the Big Day Kahuna. We talked about that already in really quick, but we're going to go into a little bit further. And now we also understand in our chapter 20, verse 29, it says over there, the Yiru Kol Ha'eda, the whole people saw that Aaron had died. I want to go back to that verse a second. I think we actually quoted it. Maybe not. Let's see. Okay, I don't have it here. So I want to go to it. I have it right here in front of me. You said 29. When the entire assembly saw, it says over here, 29, the Yiru Kol Ha'eda Kigava Aaron, the Yivchu. Okay, we did read it, but I wanted to refer to, actually, there is a verse I want to look at. In Numbers chapter 20, verse 29, as I was mentioning, the whole congregation saw that Aaron had expired, and the entire house of Israel wept. Now, look in the Hebrew, it says, V'yiru kol ha'eda. Okay? Now, I want you to go down for a second into the Rashi. It says, Rabbi Yosef, don't read it as V'yiru, they saw, but rather as with a tseireh, V'yeru'u. V'yeru'u. They were exposed. Remember, the covering, the clouds of glory, were in the merit of Aaron, and when the clouds of glory departed, we were exposed. The clouds of glory were covering us, just like it covers the cover of the Aron HaKodesh. It covers it, and that's where we have that divine intimacy with Hashem. When these clouds of glory departed as a result of Aaron's death, look at Rashi. They were exposed because Aaron had died and the clouds departed. You know what happened at that point? Amalek saw that Aaron died. Also, what does it mean they saw? They knew that it actually says they heard. It says they heard that Aaron had died. Where were they that they heard? No, they heard that the clouds departed from, the spies around, in fact, they could have seen the clouds depart. But as soon as they saw the clouds depart, they understood that this is an opportunity now to come and attack. Because the clouds of glory was our sail, was our protection. Okay, so now that's how... Let's just read in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, with 3 lines down from the bottom on the Yakar. V'yeru'u, the yud is with its seireh. Sheniru. Sheniru means they were seen. They were seen, meaning they were exposed. Hainu b'hasarat anan, through the removal of the clouds of glory. Shenim shalabeged, the clouds of glory are similar or compared to a article of clothing, something that covers us. The smichu lebigdei kahuna, and now we understand how each one of the different 8 articles of the Kohen Gadol atone, and that's why it was brought in as a proximity as well. And the fourth and final reason, or I should say, a benefit to those who are alive as well as, meaning us, that when the tzaddik is alive or the tzaddik dies, there's some kind of benefit. Here, the fourth one is when they die. Shehu mekaper aleim b'misaso. There's some aspect of, again, kaper, of a mitigating, of a defense, of a forgiveness, of an atonement through their death. And that's the smichus liyom kippurim, and that, like we said earlier on, about the 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, passing on, and then the laws of Yom Kippur. And he ends by saying, Kal lavin. This is actually easy to understand. Okay, so if it was so easy to understand, great. I want to go through some of the sources now, because they're just so beautiful ideas. Now, if we go to Moed Katan, so you have that, I think, it's the very last sheet, if I'm not mistaken. If you open that up, the last sheet on the English says like this. Amar Reb Ami. Rabbi Ami said, Lama nismicha mitat Miriam. By the way, it's Moed Katan 28a. Why is there a proximity to the death of Miriam, to Parshas Paraduma? As it says, V'tamat Sham Miriam, right after we read the chapter 19 that deals with the Paraduma, you see that Miriam died, to teach you that the Paraduma is mikaperet. It somehow atones for what? Specifically for the sin of the golden calf, but in general, all sin perhaps. Even the misason shel tzadikim mikaperet. And that last piece, even the death of the tzaddikim, and not only tzaddikim, but even tzidkaniyot, even the righteous women. And this is one of the important things, that if you thought for a moment, before we read this, that maybe righteous men atone, guess what? Righteous women atone as well. Just in case you weren't aware of that. That's going to be one of the chidushim here. Mm-hmm. And that they atone al chatai duram, for the sins of the generation. Meaning more, it's not about a personal salvation, dude. Get over it, right? And then the Gemara goes on, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Lama nismecha misas Aaron lebigdei kahuna. Why is there a proximity, the death of Aaron, to the clothing of the Kohen? Just keep in mind, I want you to look at the verses, because they're very interesting. You have in verse 28 that Moses was told to remove the clothes. Here, actually, let's look it up, because it's...
They have shipped.
Right. Let's look at 27, 28, and 29, right? In 27, actually 26. 26 already tells Moses that he should strip Aaron of his vestments. If Moses is told to strip Aaron and dress Eliezer in them, and then Aaron's going to die, what more do you need? Then it says in 27, Moses did exactly as God commanded. For sure you don't need anything after that. And yet in verse 28, it goes on and tells us again that Moses stripped Aaron's garments from him and dressed Eliezer, and Aaron died there. That whole 28 is superfluous. You don't need that at all. So therefore, it's coming to tell you there's actually a smichut. There's a juxtaposition between Aaron's death and the kahuna, the clothes of the kahuna, which was totally not necessary to say. Verse 28 is unnecessary, except it is necessary to teach us this. Okay? I want to go down to the comments down below on this page, on the right side, that in number 12, Yud Bet, that was so far, everything we read was according to Rashi, as well as the words of the Meiri. It infers that the death of the righteous person, listen to this idea, the mikaperet al yedei hitararus. Now, if you don't believe in all the metaphysical concepts that we've discussed, just on a very practical level, the death of the righteous people should awaken us, should arouse us to do tshuva. Shehi mevi ba'am v'tochacha. That it will bring through becoming, you know what I like the word? And we should reincorporate it into our language, being awoke. Really, truly, in a biblical sense, waking up spiritually, being in tune, right, with Mida Keneged Mida, whether it was the reward or the opposite, right? Really trying to understand, being conscious and aware through being woken up, hit orurus, that is brought to the people, and the rebuke, the tochacha, that happens, yoter b'misasas kol adam, by her, by the righteous woman, or by the righteous man that dies. You know, you go to a funeral and you hear the eulogy, the real eulogy, where people get up and tell you unbelievable stories. I shouldn't say unbelievable. Believable stories that are just so out of this world that is supposed to arouse you to say, wow, I am falling short on my own level. I know I could do more. I could be more. I could be nicer to my family. I could be nicer to my neighbors, right? I have to do tshuva. You hear the level that these people reach through Mesiras Nefesh, through working on their character, and you just know that you're lacking, and that's really the truth. When you want to grow spiritually, you have to think how much you're lacking, right? How far you have to go, and that's okay. And that is a practical point here. So why would we say that the Misa of the righteous cause atonement? It's through remember, it's all about tshuva. Without tshuva, it's nothing on a personal level. On a national level, that may happen whether you're aware of it or not. The next idea is that the reason the Torah actually teaches you, limda, that the death of the righteous people atone regarding this concept we've been discussing, the paraduma. The reason there's a relationship between atonement of the righteous to the paraduma is not at all related to the idea of korban, that the korban brings atonement. No, but rather that all types of korbanos, you actually have, they're usually either male alone. In other words, there's certain korbanos that are strictly a male offering, meaning the animal is of the male species, or they're either male or female. You can bring either one, it depends. There could be some details. For example, a chatas a individual sin offering has to come from one second. An individual is brought from a female, but a Kohen, Gadol, or a prince, when he brings a sin offering, has to be from a male. Okay? So you have female, male, but in other words, every offering is categorized. Either they're all male, or like a chatas could be sometimes a female, sometimes a male, but a paraduma is always a female, and therefore we're learning about Miriam, the righteous woman, who's acting as the aim kol chai, as the female who is the mother of all life, or let's say the righteous person who's the mother of all life, is going to mekaper for her children, or clean up like the mother of the cow cleans up for her children. Lemanu shelo rak misas sadikim nikaperes, ella mitat nashim tzidkanios. To teach us, it's not only the righteous men who act in this way, but also righteous women also perform this amazing idea. I just want to skip down to the next one. Yud Dalid, it's a very interesting piece, and I do believe that I brought it down in the English. This would be from Gemara Zvachim. So let's just look at it over there. It is found, anybody want to help me? In the English pages. Okay.
13.
Yeah, number 6. Number 6 says, in 88b in Zvachim, that the different, you can look at the English, I'll just read the Hebrew, right? That the 8 different garments atone for different sins. So here we have it, that clearly that the ketonet, which is like the robe, that atones for murder, and like for example, if you had somebody murder somebody, they had edim meaning witnesses, but they didn't give the proper hatra'ah. They didn't give the proper warning. So we have a problem here. There's no justice that can be done. So this part of the clothing of the Kohen Gadol will atone. Again, is it for the individual murderer, or is it because the people are responsible? It sounds like it's a general idea here. The michnasayim, the pants, are going to atone for Gilei Arayos, for the nation. If they sink into this sin, right, there's a certain amount of atonement that will atone for sexual sins. The mitznefet, which is the turban, is going to atone for haughtiness. The avnei, which is the belt, is going to atone for hira alev, which is thoughts within the heart. The choshen, which is the breastplate, is going to atone for dinim, like a lot of these are, on the people in general. The ephod is the apron, which is going to mechaper, atone for idol worship. The me'il, which is the under shirt, it's going to atone for lashon hara b'farhesia, slander that was done in public. The tzitz, which is the plate on the forehead, is going to atone for brazenness. Now, the Re'if explains that these garments of the Kohen Gadol, they don't atone, they're not going to atone for sins. Let me just read in Hebrew. Shebigdei kahuna einem nekaprim lechoite et etzem ha'avonos halalu. It's not going to atone for the sin, the actual sin that the person performed, but rather, rak me'olim shelo yikatru olav lahachriya lechoide. What it does is that it helps or it assists that the prosecutor cannot make the person so obligated. In other words, it doesn't expedite, it doesn't expunge the sin completely. It's just like I said in the beginning, there's a covering over. Okay? The next idea is a very interesting idea, and that is that usually we say before you can get atonement on Yom Kippur, if it's a sin between you and God, that's one thing. Hashem might forgive you. That's great. But when it comes to bein adam l'chavero, there's a lot more you need to do. You have to physically go out of your way to do tshuva and apologize to the person or make up some kind of restitution if that particular sin requires it. We call that bein adam l'chavero. Well, guess what? Didn't we mention that the me'il actually atones for lashon hara before hesia? So here we have this idea, tremendous idea, that the paraduma does a lot more than we thought. Let me just read the words. This is in the words of Rabbi Eliezer. It's like he's adding to the words of Rav Ami. That was the second opinion about the Big Day Kahuna. He's adding on to what we said about Miriam. And from here we learn that the righteous people who die, they atone even for sins. When I say they die, that's not why they died. Through their death, they actually atone even for sins bein adam l'chavero, between one person and another. And this is what we find when we talked about the Big Day Kahuna, the high priest's garment. For example, that the me'il is mechaper, somehow atones for lashon hara. Now, if we hadn't learned that, if we hadn't learned the second opinion, Rabbi Eliezer, we might have thought that through the death of the righteous people, they would not help. That it would not help someone who is evil towards Hashem or evil towards other people. But we learn opposite of that. So perhaps also that's one idea, meaning even if you're bein adam l'chaver, you're still mechaper. Whereas also the drush of Rabbi Ami is also necessary. In other words, they're both necessary to teach us lo rak mis tzadikim zecharim mekaper. It's not only the death of the righteous men. Many men have through their death have brought atonement amongst the people, but even women. Elegam mises nashim tzidkanios. That's the chiddush, that even through the death of women, you might not have thought that. And the Torah is going out of its way to teach you that. You know, they're not obligated in so many mitzvahs. So you might think that they're not as righteous. Not at all the case. Just because they have less mitzvahs does not make them any less righteous. Right? They have less mitzvahs, but they do them. They're just as righteous as everyone else. Don't walk away thinking that men are holier than women. It just ain't true. Just ain't true. Okay, so that is from the Trum Sedeshin. Okay, now I want to go quickly into one of the comments on that Gemara, Moed Katan, and you'll find this like this. What is the intent? Ma hakavana. What is the intent that the paraduma itself atones? Right? It's a very strange idea. So Tosfos writes that the paraduma atones for the sin of the egel, the sin of the golden calf. Just like we said in the Midrash about the shifcha, the handmaiden who's in the palace. She brought her kid in for the day, and the kid made a baligan, made a mess. So the king says, get the shifcha, get the handmaiden to come clean up the mess for her child. So too, the sin of the golden calf. What happens? How are we going to be atoned for that? The mother comes. Who's the mother? The cow. And she's the mother, and she cleans up the sin of her child. Rabbeinu Hananel, he writes that just as the paraduma, it purifies those who are sinners, chataim, nikras chatas. I should say like this. Just as the para is mitaharat chataim, nikra chatas, that in a certain sense, the paraduma allows the person who had sinned, right, to now go to the base of Mikdash and bring korbanos, and then find their salvation, meaning their atonement, right? In other words, the paraduma is not expunging the sin, but what it's doing is allowing the sinner to go up to the Har HaBayit and bring his sin offering and participate. So too, kol chatas mikaperes avon. So too, right? The sin offering itself atones Not that the paraduma atones, but the paraduma allows you, the sinner, to go up and be atoned. So too, the death of the righteous people, they are mataharis, Tadigim mataharis, mikaperis avonotam shel Yisrael. So the death of the righteous people purify and atone for the sins of the Jewish people. Uke'ein zeh ketav beferush, similar to this written specifically. Okay, the last piece, what's the kesher? What's the exact connection between the death of the tzaddik to the para aduma? So the kesher between the para aduma to the death of the righteous, the Ya'aros Devash writes that both of them are segule blitam. Remember I mentioned the word kapara means oxymoron. I don't even know what an oxymoron is. Anybody know?
It's like a muvan me'elav.
Two steers that cannot be resolved.
Right.
Two contradictory ideas that cannot be resolved. We saw that. That's what the dictionary describes kapara. So to say it's a kapara, there's these two contradictory things that are very difficult to resolve, that even King Solomon could not resolve them. Listen to this. Just as the paraduma purifies without reason, we have no idea why, so too the death of the righteous also, whatever mikaperet, atones for below tam, without reason. So too the Eitz Yosef describes this on the Ein Yaakov. He brings, in the name of the Nezer HaKodesh, that explains that just as the para aduma atones for the sin of the golden calf, so too, from what reason? From the reason that the mother comes and cleans up the feces, the dirt of her child, so too the death of the righteous person atones or covers over biyot shehem memakor nefashos ha'olam. Remember we described her as the Aim Kol Chai. The righteous woman is the mother of all life. So too, the death of the righteous is going to atone, it's from the source of all souls in the world. And they are metaharim zahumat b'neihem. They somehow clean or purify or spiritually disinfect the souls of their progeny, their children. Okay, there's one more Gemara I wanted to look at before we finish, and that is in Gemara Brachos 17a, that you will find on the sheets. I'll tell you where. I think it's on page 5, so it's very small. But basically the Gemara says like this. Just as Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, the Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, says Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, each and every day, b'kol yom v'yom. Now this is during the days of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. There was a bas kol, some kind of voice from heaven. We'll call it a low level of prophecy. It's not so low, but it's where many people have Ruach HaKodesh and are hearing the same message. It's not a bas kol that is spoken out loud per se, but it's spoken within the head of a group of people. Everyone hears the same thing. Have a good Shabbos. Kol ha'am kulo nizunim b'shvil, and this bas kol would speak out from Har Sinai, and it would say that the whole world, in its entirety, is being nourished on account of Chanina b'ni, Chanina my son, and whereas Chanina b'ni, Chanina himself only ate a bucket full of carobs from one Shabbos, from Erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos, during the entire week. On the right side, in the middle, it brings down Im mezonotav shel adam taloi b'schuto o b'mazlo. It's a very interesting concept. What gives us the nourishment or parnasa? How much money do I make a year? Am I going to have enough food? So basically, there's a whole discussion. Is this left to fate? In other words, it was already determined how rich I will be, me personally, or is it up to me? So just to get an idea, if you go to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 13, it's an amazing thing because it talks about all the blessings that come to a person. So this reward, is this coming to an individual based on his own actions, or is it left to fate? So like I said, go to Deuteronomy chapter 7:13. And it says like this: God will love you, bless you, multiply you, and he will bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, your grain, your wine, and your oil. Just all the most beautiful blessings that there could be. But guess what? You go to verse 12. Just go one verse before. All this reward is only going to happen if you listen, if you observe and perform them. So is it on us? Sounds like from here, it's totally on us. It's not left to fate. The choice is in your hands. But we do have a question. How can God say, or how can the father of Hanina say that the whole world's nourished because of him? It's nothing to do with us. It's fate. Or is it in our hands? So listen to this comment below. B'kol yom v'yom, each and every day, this bas kol, this voice came out from heaven, from Mount Sinai, and it says the whole entire world is nourished on account of somebody else, not me, right? Hanina. And Hanina himself lasted or survived on just one bucket of carobs. So the Rashba explains that Dan Bestira Gedola, in order to understand and investigate this great discrepancy that we find Binyanim Elu of Kabbalah Schar, receiving reward on account of the merits of person. Do we receive reward? We basically say all the reward is in the world to come, and there are peyrot, there are like little crumbs of reward we can receive in this world. Behold, Rava in Moed Katan, Kafchet, he actually says, Amar, B'nei Chai, meaning living human beings, the populace, Mizone la b'schuto tloy b'milse ela b'mazla tloy b'milse. That whatever parnasa, whatever a person gets, has nothing to do with his actions. It's purely fate. It's purely in the stars. It's purely beyond our control. But that's a kasha. That's a big question, because we saw so many verses that describe the opposite. Like we just read in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 12 and 13. It's totally dependent on what we do. Right? The kasha, right? Psukim nefurshim heim b'torah, sha'ayidei schut yotav, shal adam, zayche, livnei chayei mazona. It's really dependent on what we do. The hevi sham harbe psukim, and you can bring many verses, and he does, like the ones we just read. The ken kasha, and he asked another question. Ek nifrash nefaresh hadavar shayu lechanina zuchuyotav gedolos. How can the Gemara even say that on account of one person, the whole world is fed, the whole world is nourished because of one person? That sounds like an exaggeration. And not only that, whereas by himself, he only got one bucket? How can it be? We're talking about billions and billions of tons of food coming to the world because of this guy, and he gets one bucket? You hear the question? It's a great question. Zechil leklal Yisrael. You know what's happening? Through him, all of Israel, the general people, their mezonotav, whatever nourishment they get, that's because of his merits, because of that one person's merits. But adam prati, but when it comes to the individual person, eino mekabel b'nei chayim mazono machmas chayatav. That is not going to help the individual person. That individual person is still relying on what Hashem has decreed, the decree of God. Whatever the stars say, remember, we can always change that. Okay, that's a whole nother class. How you can change your mazel, right? We're not stuck in mazel. But apparently, that was b'mazel shelo. Al kain hagam shekol Yisrael nenem b'zchuyotav shel chanina. That the Jewish people were benefiting from the merit of Chanina, of his merit. We derive pleasure from what he gained for us. But he himself Lo haya lo elakav charuvim, all he himself in heaven was decreed to get. And why that was? Because maybe he had to suffer. And that is part of, right? The righteous people suffering. Isaiah 53, if you just understand who the servant is the Jewish people. And through the Jewish people, if you come and learn Torah with us, as opposed to learning on your own, or trying to learn on your own, learn Torah with the Jewish people. You cannot lose, because then you will have the proper understanding. And with that, I'm going to sign off. I'm wishing everybody a pleasant week, a great, unbelievable Shabbos, and a great life. And we'll see you next week.
Yiboneh